a major rescue operation, as the United States saying they recovered a fighter that went down in Iran just within the last several days. I want to put up this post from President Trump saying, quote, "We got him." As we learned this, a frantic U.S. search and rescue operation unfolded after the crash of an F-15E Strike Eagle jet on Friday, as Iran also promised to reward anyone that returned this enemy pilot. Trump said the service member was, quote, "seriously wounded and really brave and rescued from deep inside the mountains." He said a second crew member was on board in broad daylight within hours of the crash. This coming in from Jennifer Griffin as well, saying that second American, the F-15 crew member, rescued safe after a complex rescue operation that began Friday morning. Two U.S. senior officials confirmed to her there with Fox News. And this was a very important, a race, a life or death race between the U.S. and Iranian forces that stretched over 2 days to reach the injured airman who was a weapons system officer. Current and former U.S. officials telling New York Times in the end, U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6 extracted the officer in a massive operation that involved hundreds of special operation troops and other military personnel. So let's get into this, but obviously very good news from this. Let's be joined right now by retired Lieutenant Colonel with the Air Force, Jason O'Harris. Jason, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And when this turns out to be good news in the end, obviously everyone exhales a sigh of relief. What do you make of this operation and just on the timing of what you heard?
You know, this is absolutely fantastic news, Andy. The idea of a downed airman, you know, we train for this, but we hope and pray that this never happens. And so an absolute sigh of relief for everyone that's involved. And I can only imagine for that downed airman as well as that airman's family. You know, but the Combat Search and Rescue Forces, their motto is so that others may live. And they train so hard, so precisely to make sure that they are ready for when this moment happens, that they can go in there and make certain that they are able to recover a downed American pilot, aviator, Wizzo, or whatever the case may be, no matter what the conditions are, no matter where in the world they are.
And let's talk about it. Let's take us back when this was happening there in Iran. Of course, the U.S.-Iranian forces involved in this, U.S. looking for them, Iran looking for them. When this fighter officially goes down, they eject. Obviously, they're on the ground. What immediately happens? What's the first thing that takes place?
So immediately when that happens, the Combat Search and Rescue Forces, or what we call the CSAR, they spring into action. There are people that are looking for any type of information to determine where that crew might have went down at. They are figuring out what they can do to get in there as fast as they can so that they can recover that downed aviator as fast as they possibly can. And on the other side, that pilot, that Wizzo, when they're ejecting out, they're starting to go through everything that they've learned, all the training, all the procedures, all the checklists that we have that have been implanted in our minds from day one of our training. They go through that over and over to make sure that as soon as they hit the ground, and even before they hit the ground, that they are ready to do everything that is required for them to be able to survive and come back home with honor.
Yeah, and obviously you talked about that SEER, that survival, evasion, resistance, escape kind of plan. This individual knew that the United States was looking for him. How much communication, if at all, obviously a GPS tracking beacon, what type of communication did this individual have, or was it just kind of seek high ground and wait?
You know, we are provided with various pieces of equipment that are in our survival packs for that fighter pilot, crew, the Wizzo and the pilot. In the bottom of their seats, when they eject, they have various pieces of equipment. Some of it may be communication equipment. Some of it may be signaling equipment. And they are trained on how to utilize that equipment as soon as possible so that they can get the word back to friendly forces. And then friendly forces are going into the process of making contact as best they can, whether it's by voice, whether it's by signal, or some other type of manner in which they have planned for, and they go by what the CSAR team has planned out in the event that that happens in that particular area of operations.
Yeah, and we showed a little bit of that map, exactly where it was, because it was airlifted to Kuwait. taken over by some military personnel. And we also know from the president talking on social media that this seriously wounded, really brave F-15 crew member officer from deep inside the mountains of Iran, the Iranian military looking hard in big numbers. He's a highly respected colonel. This type of raid is seldom attempted because of the danger to man and equipment. It just doesn't happen. The second raid came after the first one, where we rescued a pilot in broad daylight, also unusual, spending hours, 7 hours over Iran. How dangerous is this, not only for the crew on the ground, the individual, the fighter that was remaining there, the weapons officer, but also the individuals rescuing him? How much were they kind of being scoped out? How much were they entering this threat?
You know, it's extreme danger anytime you go into contested territory, anytime you go into hostile environments. And then the danger is only heightened when you start talking about operating during the daylight. You know, when we're able to operate under the cover of darkness, that provides us a level of safety, a level of security. But when you're operating in the daytime, people are able to see you. There's not the ability to hide at night and operate under night vision goggles. And so the level of danger that these crews place themselves in intentionally with the sole purpose of rescuing that aviator is absolutely critical to understand when it comes to how dangerous that mission was. I mean, it's not easy to begin with when you do this kind of mission, but it's even more dangerous, as I stated before, when it's during the middle of the day.
Yeah, that is so very true. Obviously, everyone visible in those potentially military aircrafts going into the region as well. How critical are the first day or two of a rescue operation like this? Is it very critical in nature? Because if you span beyond a few days, it obviously gets more sparse.
Time is of the essence when it comes to a combat search and rescue mission. You got to think about that particular aviator. When they came out of that aircraft, they ejected. That added a significant level of stress to their body. So their body is trying to survive. And then you have to think about their ability to maintain nourishment from food, from water, being able to stay out of sight from enemy forces. And so the more that time goes on, the more dangerous it becomes. And especially in a contested environment, when you start thinking about there are people looking for this particular aviator. And so time is not on our side. So the sooner we get to them, the better. And when you start talking getting to 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours and beyond, it becomes exponentially more dangerous for that person that's trying to evade being captured. And it becomes exponentially more dangerous for those combat search and rescue forces that are trying to get to that person as soon as they possibly can.
Yeah, and obviously we got him, so that is the good part, the optimistic good part about this. But this was only happening, obviously, in reality, but also in the kind of information space, as Trey Yanks posting here, saying the CIA leaked through multiple sources that they were trying to move a vulnerable package out of the country through this. They're told this was meant to draw the Iranians away from the area where the U.S. crew member was located. The deception campaign worked. How critical and what kind of facets is the CIA involved in this to kind of showcase a different location for the Iranians, so they're looking in a wrong spot for them? How critical was the CIA involved here?
Well, based on that verbiage that you quoted and what was shown, that they were very critical. When you're doing search and rescue operations, there is so much that goes into it, and there are various agencies that are playing a part and that are contributing to what it's going to take to actually affect that rescue. And so, unbeknownst to many that are not privy to the information, it might have been not just the CIA, but it might have been other agencies. But we will do whatever it takes, utilizing whichever agencies are necessary, that allows that search and rescue force to get in there, and that allows that airman to have a fighting chance of being repatriated back to U.S. forces.
What would have happened, and obviously you hate to think about it, what would have happened if this individual was captured by opposition forces, by Iranian forces?
You know, I hate to think about that, and I hate to even consider what could have happened. You know, we have no idea what those fighters would be thinking about, what they would be charged to do. And then the question becomes is how they would treat an American airman, how they would treat someone that they're taking as hostile against them. And so that is why it's absolutely critical that we got to him as soon as we could, because the unthinkable could have happened. And none of us that have flown airplanes, none of us that have been in harm's way in combat want to even consider the possibility of what could happen. But the other thing to understand, Andy, is that when we go through our SEER training, we are also trained for the worst case scenarios of what could happen. And we're trained to resist providing information, and we're trained to ensure that we come back home with honor, meaning that we don't denigrate our country, we don't denigrate our service members, and we don't denigrate or give up critical information that pertains to the mission that we're actually out there doing.
What does the training look like for that? Because they're trying to potentially get information about assets in the region, about some of the capabilities of the aircraft, about some of the goals of the different strategic measures of this conflict in Iran. What information are they trying to gather, and potentially how is that training to avoid that?
As you can imagine, in a hostile environment, the enemy is going to try to gain as much information and as much valuable information as they possibly can extract from an individual. And so when we go through our training, like you said, it's survival, it's evasion, it's resistance, and it's escape. So we're trained, how do you survive in that mountainous environment? How do you survive in a contested environment? And then how do you evade being captured? And then how do you resist even once you're captured? And then how do you do everything that you can to set yourself up to escape as soon as you can? So that training, it varies depending on what kind of training that person has gone through. Some of us have gone through varying levels of survival training, and then each branch of service has a different type of training, but overall we all do the same types of training. And the thing to understand is that we don't just train for what could happen. We also go back and they teach us about those who have gone into captured environments. They teach us the stories and tell us the lessons learned from folks who have evaded, folks who have escaped, so that we not only have a playbook, we not only have the procedures and the training, but we also understand the context in which the context in which a hostile enemy might operate when it comes to being captured, when it comes to being hunted down, and how we can evade and get back to U.S. forces.
I want to get more into that, the evasion portion of this, because you can imagine, I can only picture what's going on as you eject from this fighter jet. You kind of land in enemy space. Are you trying to run away? Because obviously the scene of the crash, the scene of this individual, obviously it may seem apparent that's where everyone is heading. Are they trained to leave that scene, or where are they trained to go?
You know, our training teaches us everything that we need to know from the time we eject out of an aircraft to the time we hit the ground, to the time we get to be recovered by U.S. forces. That training teaches us everything that we need to do from the moment we come out of that aircraft. That training teaches us who we need to contact, when we contact them, how we contact them. And then the other thing that we do is that when we get into that contested environment, before we ever go out to fly a mission, we have a briefing, and it shows us more specifics to that area so that we understand what combat search and rescue forces are in place, and we understand what we need to do in the event that we actually have to evade being captured by enemy forces.
And obviously we're seeing some of the debris that the Iranian state media put out there. So obviously trying to evade, and it worked, that they were able to get away with the help of the CIA, with the help of Israel as well. And this was the first known American fighter jet that has crashed into Iranian territory since they launched the war on Iran back on February the 28th. And there's been a lot of conversation about the capabilities of the Iranian Air Force, how they're able to try to take down some of these. Does it concern you that this fighter jet was able to be assessed in such a way that it was able to be shot, that two fighters had to eject out of their plane? Does that concern you?
You know, anytime you're in a contested environment, there's always a concern for what could go wrong. You know, you have some of the most sophisticated weaponry that the Iranians had, but then there's also unsophisticated weaponry that people on the ground might still have and have access and have the capability of taking out an aircraft. And then there's also the potential that there are unsophisticated weapons where someone actually gets lucky, right? That lucky BB. So while there is always an inherent danger, we also prepare for those worst case scenarios. And it's what we train for. We train to do our best to evade getting shot. We train to do our best to evade having to eject out of an aircraft. But if and when it does, we know that we have the training in our back pocket to allow us to survive. And we also know that we have those combat search and rescue forces that are ready and prepared to go and come out and rescue us.
And on this post from Fox News, from Trey Yinks, his reporting talking about that numbers of members who were in this rescue operation, it did not involve a firefight between the U.S. and Iranian forces. What are protocols in place? What are the rules in place when an individual goes down? Are the rules off? Because obviously the United States and Iran was looking for them. What's in place there between Iran and the United States in this engagement, and potentially why there wasn't a firefight?
Anytime you have rescue operations happening, there are things that we have to follow. And anytime we're fighting in an environment, contested environment, again, we have rules that we follow. There are international rules, and then there are rules that we have that are specific to our particular units. There are rules that we have as far as rules of engagement is what they're actually called. And so it's the idea is to never have to fire a round in the combat environment. But if you do, you must ensure that you follow those rules of engagement. And so in this case, it's great that the rescue forces did not have to fire any weapons as far as getting into a gunfight. But of course, if they have to fight off enemy forces to make sure that they're able to rescue that American and to ensure that they're able to get off the ground and get back to American forces safely, they will do whatever is necessary to make that happen. But there's not a all rules don't apply once we go into that environment. We are always following rules, we're always following regulations, and we're always following our rules of engagement that are laid down before we go out into harm's way.
How specialized of a group would it be? Because in the New York Times reporting a Navy SEAL Team 6, and you see those the best of the best, what priority and what level of skill do the individuals that were in these search and rescue operations, is it the best of the best going to search for this American?
Combat search and rescue forces are the most elite that we have with regards to being able to rescue people. And so primarily for our combat search and rescue forces, you're going to have some special operations air crew members with regards to the aircraft. You're going to have some special operations crew members, perhaps pararescue or PJs. You might have combat controllers, and then you might also have another force such as SEAL Team 6 or another Navy SEAL team that goes in there to help in other capacities as it pertains to the rescue force itself. But rest assured that every single person that was on that rescue mission is not only good, but they are the most elite, the most well-trained, and the most well-disciplined military members that we could even remotely send to rescue a downed airman.
Yeah, and obviously the priority was this weapons officer that they recovered from this region, but they're also talking about assets in the region, as reports say U.S. forces deliberately destroyed several of their own transport planes that have been disabled on the ground to prevent being captured by Iranian forces. What does that entail? How much is the United States, the military, focused on that, not allowing technology as well to get in the hands of Iranians?
When you're doing this kind of a mission, you have to consider contingency plans. You have to consider the second, third, fourth orders of effects for every decision that you make. And there are decisions that are made before they go out to do the rescue mission. There are decisions that are made in the process of getting there. And then there are decisions that are made once they get on the ground. And so in this case, there likely was some malfunctions or some issues that happened with those aircraft. And the last thing that we want to have happen is for these extremely sophisticated aircraft with tons of equipment on there that are special operations type of aircraft to go into the hands of enemy forces. And so the decision was made for us to ensure that they don't end up in the wrong hands. So they made the decision to destroy those aircraft instead of allowing them to end up in the hands of enemy forces. But again, the decisions that are made are critical, and there's not a lot of time to make those decisions. It has to be made immediately, and they consider all of the different options very quickly, make a decision, and move forward and move out.
Yeah, it all happened so very fast. And I also want to put up more information about exactly what was going on after the Americans got this individual, this weapons system officer back. This coming in from Axios saying the amazing detail. The weapons system officer downed in the F-15 made contact being radioed by saying God is good. U.S. side thought they might be a signal that he was in Iranian captivity, feared an ambush. Troops who knew this weapons system officer said he was deeply religious, and that was something that he would say. So it's interesting that potentially this individual made contact with U.S. prior to the United States going get him, but also you mentioned some of the contingency plans. You don't know exactly what's out there. So it feels like this individual had a radio. Am I reading that right?
Typically in our survival kits, there is a survival radio that we have the capability of utilizing. And so it's quite possible that he was utilizing that survival radio to make contact with U.S. forces, and that's possibly where they got that information from without me knowing the full details of that operation.
And once they recover this individual, this weapons system officer, obviously going back into friendly airspace, taking him to make sure he's okay, what happens next to this individual? What are they looking for? What are they kind of managing with their psyche, but also their physical well-being?
I think first and foremost, when you are repatriated, they want to make sure that medically you're okay. And then they're going to go through the process. There's a specific process when you repatriate somebody in that type of environment to understand what happened, to understand what they went through, and to ensure that they're able to reintegrate with their family, be able to reintegrate with their unit, and to make sure that everyone is safe and that no one else is in danger. And so they'll go through a very specific process to make sure that that happens. And the unit and the leadership will make sure that that person is taken care of as best as possible to ensure that they are fully safe and fully recovered from everything that has occurred in that last 24, 48 hours of their life.
What else can we learn from this operation? Obviously, you don't want to get shot down. The F-15 there on the ground in Iran. They did have to rescue an American. What else can we learn from this rescue operation?
I think the biggest thing to learn and to take away is our combat search and rescue forces, they follow the procedures necessary to repatriate American aviator. I think it's also essential to understand that the survival training that we go through, it actually works. If that particular colonel, that weapons system operator, if he did not have that survival training, it's possible he would not have been able to make it back to U.S. forces safely. And so I think it's imperative that we understand that we have the best of the best when it comes to rescue forces. We have the best of the best when it comes to our aviators. But it's also important to understand that our search and rescue forces, their motto, that others may live, lives up to what it says. And they proved it once again that they would do anything and everything and take extreme dangers intentionally to make sure that we rescue an American airman.
How much pride do you take in that fact? Because everything at a standstill, the operation from Israel to assist in the recovery of this American fighter that went down, this weapons system officer. How proud is the military, is the Air Force of this to search in such a way with such force to go after an individual, just a singular individual in enemy territory?
This is what they train for. This is what they live for. And as a combat aviator myself, having deployed 11 times in combat, I knew that every single time I walked out the door on a combat mission, if something went wrong, I knew that someone would come to rescue me. I knew that those combat search and rescue forces would do any and every single thing possible to make certain that I made it back home to my family, to my country, as well as to my military unit. And so that just only serves to add more pride and confidence in what we say when it comes to our combat search and rescue forces.
All right, very good. Jason Harris, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your insight here on Live Now from Fox. Obviously, everyone a sign of relief that the recovery effort was a success. Thanks again.
Thank you, Andy. Take care, brother.
Thank you so much. All right, and this was the post from the president immediately after this saying, "We got him, my fellow Americans. Over the past several hours, the United States military pulled off one of the most daring search and rescue operations in U.S. history for one of our incredible crew member officers, who also happens to be a highly respected colonel, who I am thrilled to let you know is now safe and sound. This brave warrior was behind enemy lines in treacherous mountains of Iran, being hunted down by our enemies who were getting closer and closer by the hour, but was never truly alone because of his commander-in-chief and others, including the Secretary of War, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and fellow warfighters. They were monitoring his location 24 hours a day, diligently planning for his rescue. At my direction, the U.S. military sent dozens of aircraft armed with the most lethal weapons in the world to retrieve him. He sustained injuries, but will be just fine. The miraculous search and rescue operation comes in addition to a successful rescue of another brave pilot yesterday, which we did not confirm because we did not want to jeopardize the second rescue operation. This is the first time in military memory that 2 U.S. pilots have been rescued separately deep in enemy territory. We will never leave an American warfighter behind. The fact that we're able to pull off both of these operations without a single American killed or even wounded just proves again that we have achieved, obviously, overwhelming air dominance and superiority over the Iranian skies. This is all a moment that all Americans, Republican, Democrat, and everyone else can be proud of and united around.